A Kelly Clarkson song. Like I was entering a fight and I can't get the Bluetooth. But how many of you, now you can admit to it, how many of you have heard Kelly Clarkson's song, Stronger? Okay, you can admit it. I know it's church. Let me tell you how it goes. I was going to play it. It was going to be awesome, and then technology didn't work. So the Lord didn't want you to hear it this morning, probably because it'd be stuck in your head all morning. But the chorus goes like this. If it doesn't kill me, makes me stronger. Stronger. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Yes. All right, so there you go. Even if you are not a Kelly Clarkson fan, which I am not, and even if you do not listen to that kind of music, which many of you probably do not, you have probably heard that song around in the grocery store or somewhere else at some point in the last little bit. All right, because it's a song that became very popular. It hit the Billboard #1 back in 2012 for several weeks. And so it is her song called Stronger. And in the song, it basically talks about the fact that she'll be even stronger after a breakup and a heartbreak that she has just went through. Now this is all going to make sense in a minute, but as I kind of looked at that song and looked at the lyrics, I studied it a little bit, and it actually came, that chorus actually came from a statement, a quote by a well-known atheist named Friedrich Nietzsche. And the quote was simply this: "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." She took that quote, she turned it into a song, and it became a huge hit that you'll still hear on the radio today. And so although Nietzsche was an antagonist about everything we believe as children of God, we do find that that statement that he makes, there was actually truth in that statement. Because for the Christian, we understand that trials and the hard things we go through have the potential of growing our faith. And he said, if it doesn't kill me, it makes me stronger. And in our lives, the painful, hard, difficult things we go through do indeed make us stronger. And so our title today is simply this: Getting Stronger. Getting Stronger is our title today. T.B. Joshua said this: trials are the soil in which faith flourishes. Lucius Seneca said this: a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. Great missionary Hudson Taylor said this: all of our difficulties are only platforms for the manifestations of his grace, power, and love. And so in all these quotes, we see this idea, this concept that although we do not necessarily enjoy going through the trials and the difficulties of life, God can use those things to make us stronger, to build our faith, and to draw us closer to Himself. And that is what James is going to talk about here as he begins this letter to these 12 tribes that were scattered all throughout. They were suffering all sorts of persecution, going through all sorts of hard things. He's going to open his letter by reminding them that whatever it is they were facing, and wherever it was they found themselves, they could be encouraged because God could take that trial and turn it into a triumph. He could take that test and turn it into a testimony. And whatever it was they were facing, God could use it for good in their lives. Because we know as believers, Romans 8:28 is in the Bible, and it says, "For we know that all things work together for good to those who love God and those who are called according to His purpose." God can take the mess of our lives and turn it into a great message that He can use. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And as we talk about getting stronger and building our faith. And so our main idea is simply this: we cannot choose our trials, but we can choose whether or not we grow from them. We cannot choose our trials, but we can choose whether or not we grow from them. And so today, I think as we look at these three verses, there are three important truths that we need to see, or three important ideas that we need to consider. And the first one is simply this: in this passage, we see the painful reality. I spelled that wrong. The painful reality of trials. All right, the painful reality of trials. Notice what it says here. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. So a few things we need to understand just from that short sentence in talking about trials. The first one is simply this. Trials are unavoidable. Again, as we dive into this passage, we need to understand that there are some important key words that we need to kind of pause in and take notice of. The first one I want us to see this morning is that word when. Count it all joy, my brothers, when. Notice here, it does not say if. Count it all joy, my brothers, if you fall into various trials. It says when. So what does that teach us? It teaches us that you and I, no matter who we are not exempt from the trials and the testings of life. We can do our best to try to avoid them. We can do our best to try to steer around them. But no matter who we are, we will not avoid the trials of life. We can lock ourselves up in our house, not talk to anybody ever, and still face trials in life. They are unavoidable. And so it says, when you fall into trials of various kinds, not if. The assumption is all of us are going to face them. I've heard it said many times, if you are not in the midst of a storm right now, you've either just come out of one or you're heading into one. They are just a normal part of life. So this should not be a shocking statement for any of us. Whether we're followers of our God or not, we understand that in this life there will be trouble. In fact, Jesus warned us of that fact in John 16:33. Notice what it says. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. But take heart, I have overcome the world. In 1 Peter 4:12, Peter lets us know that we are going to face trials. Notice what he says. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery trial when it comes upon you to test you, as though something strange were happening to you. So Jesus told us about it. Peter tells us about it. Not convinced yet? Let's look at Paul. What does he have to say about it? He wrote a lot about trials because he went through the ringer for the cause of Christ. Notice what he says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that the surpassing power belongs to God and not to us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not driven to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Again, that is a Christian, a believer, a missionary, a great man of God who says, listen, we are going to go through tough things as we navigate through life. Trials are unavoidable. I don't care who you are, how old or young you may be in this room, all of us are going to face trials in our life. So they're unavoidable. Another thing we see from that statement as we look in James here is not only are they unavoidable, but they are also unplanned. We don't get to plan for the trials that we face in life. Notice, when you meet trials of various kinds, it says meet trials. This does not suggest that we accidentally fall into them, but trials often come at times when we are not expecting them. You and I don't get to pick which trials we face and when we go through them. We don't get to pick the hardships that come into our lives. Now, sometimes there are things that are a product of our own poor decisions. But many of the trials and the tests that we face just happen. They're just a part of life, and we don't get to pick and choose when they befall us. So they're unavoidable. They're unplanned. Another thing we see in this statement is that they are unpredictable. Notice it says various kinds of trials. You see, different lessons need to be taught with different kinds of trials. I love what Warren Wiersbe says, a great commentator, one of my favorite commentators. He says this: some trials come simply because we are human. Things like sickness, accidents, disappointments, even seeming tragedies. Other trials come because we are Christians, as we face persecution and hardship and difficulty, because there is an enemy that is seeking to destroy you. There is an enemy that is seeking to keep you from growing in your relationship with God. Sometimes we go through difficulties because they are simply a consequence of our actions. But the idea here is that the trials we face are just a normal part of life. Thomas Watson said this: the devil tempts that he may deceive, but God suffers us to be tempted to try us. So the devil tempts that he may deceive, but God suffers us to be tempted to try us. And so we need to understand, as followers of Jesus, anytime we are seeking to grow closer to God, the enemy is seeking to keep that from happening. In fact, again, Wiersbe says, whenever we are serious about spiritual growth, the enemy gets serious about opposing us. So we need to understand, in our life, the more desire you have to grow in your relationship with God, the bigger the bullseye gets on your life. The more the enemy is going to try to attack you. And so again, that can be a challenge because we can look at our lives and say, okay, am I facing some opposition from the enemy? Are there spiritual attacks on my life? If not, maybe we need to examine and say, okay, am I pursuing God like I should? Because the best place the devil wants us, even though he can't take our salvation, is he wants to render us ineffective for the kingdom. And if we're sitting back doing nothing for the cause of Christ, he has us right where he wants us. He doesn't have to bring the hardships on our life. He doesn't have to bring these trials and bring these things into our life. But the more we pursue God, the more we draw closer to him, the more we have a desire to seek after the Lord, the bigger that bullseye gets, and the harder the enemy is going to try to bring us down. Understand, when we're talking about trials, we have to understand the nature of our God. Please understand that God never tempts us with evil. We'll talk more about that in future weeks. God never tempts us with evil. But he does, in his sovereignty, allow our faith to go through periods of testing. He allows us at times to go through trials because he knows that that is the only way certain spiritual lessons can be learned in our lives. For instance, think of Job, right? Job not doing anything really wrong, right? Being a great priest and father within his family, and yet there were lessons he needed to learn. And when Satan was looking to attack, Satan's telling God, it's only because of the blessings and the protection you put upon his life. And he says, okay, you can go after him. Don't take his life. Protect him in certain ways, but you can basically have at him. Just don't take his life. Right? So God was the one bringing evil on his life, but God knew that there were certain lessons Job needed to learn that he was only going to learn through testing and through hardship and through difficulty. So understand, God is sovereign over it all. He's never going to tempt you with evil, but just the fact that we live in this sinful, broken world means that we are going to face some opposition. We are going to face some hardship. Not only that, we have an enemy and his cohorts who are constantly out to attack and destroy us at every turn the closer we get to Jesus. Does that make sense? And so we need to understand that these trials we face are unpredictable. And again, as humans, we do not typically embrace suffering very willingly. We prefer comfort over pain. We prefer the easy life over the life of difficulty. And if you're anything like me, if we could, most of us would try to navigate our lives around the trials and the hardships. This past week, we were in Ohio. On Thursday, we were driving back. And I know the way because I've driven it many times, but sometimes I'll still put it in the GPS because the GPS is pretty advanced nowadays. It tells you where there's traffic, right? It tells you where there's hazards. But apparently, up on the route, there was a flash flood warning. You guys got a bunch of rain, I hear, while I was gone. All right? But there was a flash flood warning at one little part in the trip. And so the GPS is taking us all these different directions, trying to get us to avoid that area because it wants us to navigate around that difficulty. I'm like, I don't want to go these long ways. I don't think there's anything to worry about. And so I'm ignoring the GPS. And many of us in our lives, that's how we would be if we knew a trial was ahead. Right? If we knew it was coming, we would navigate around us because we prefer comfort, we prefer ease, we don't want to go through pain, we don't want to go through difficulty, even though we understand the principle that going through those things makes us stronger. And so we need to understand, just like the seasons change, so too the trials we face are quickly changing in our lives. And as I was studying this, I came across this little essay, this little writing. It's a little lengthy, but I think it's good to illustrate this point about how abundant trials are in our life. And it begins with a high school senior who lives in tension. She is at last queen of the hill, the privileged one. On the other hand, classes are still long and boring. Homework is hard, and at home she still faces curfews and chores. She looks around and she asks, is this what I've been waiting for all my life? There must be more. I'm tired of school, tired of books, tired of teachers. I'm tired of my room, my parents, my activities, my siblings. I can't wait to get out on my own, to do 1,000 new things. When graduation comes, then my trials will be over. So our young woman goes off to college. She's free, but then her major is hard, and she's working part-time to cover her expenses. Now by her senior year, she has had a serious boyfriend for a while now, and they begin to think about marriage. But they haven't been together long enough to be sure. They've navigated the challenges of a long-distance relationship successfully for a few years, but then she gets a job in Dallas, 1,000 miles from her sweetheart in Charlotte. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. They work harder than ever to master their new professions, but they are lonely and tired of being apart. So they decide to marry, gazing into each other's eyes and saying, we will be together forever. Soon, our trials will be over. The honeymoon comes and goes. They set up house in a small apartment. On her first day of work, she goes to shower and has to step over his dirty clothes from the last several days. Oh, they need so many things for the house. But he doesn't want to spend the money. And he no longer demonstrates his love with flowers and dates. He thinks, what do you mean? You want tokens of love? I married you after all. Why do you need tokens? At the table, he eats as if he were back at the fraternity. When he sleeps, he thrashes about in their bed as if he is reenacting an Olympic decathlon. Eventually, they sort things out. The trials are over. Now, they want a baby. But 1 year, then 2 years go by without success. But then, just as they prepare to meet the physicians she conceives, then they say, now our trials are over. I will now recount the trials of pregnancy, the nausea and the mood swings. Let's travel forward 8 months. They have a new, healthy baby girl. Mother and daughter leave the hospital and spend their first night at home. The baby is in bed. The parents lie down saying, our marriage is strong. Our baby is home. And they drift off to sleep thinking, now our trials are over. In an instant, they are awake. The baby is crying. Why? She is dry. She is not hungry. She is crying for no reason whatsoever. So the trials of parenthood begin. In every stage of the child's life, the parents tell themselves the next phase will be easier. When we can sleep through the night, when the baby can understand us, when we can understand her, when we are done with diapers, then it will be easier. When they are old enough to go to school, when they become more independent, when they can drive, so we no longer spend endless hours chauffeuring them to soccer games and clarinet lessons. Yes, when they can drive, then our trials will be over. When they go to college and stop fussing about curfews, we stop wondering where they are. They may never come in, but at least we won't know. Then our trials will be over. But trials never end, and things never settle down. There's always too much to do. Overwork and exhaustion are normal. So is uncertainty. Now we are dealing with aging parents and navigating those challenges on top of everything else. And the trials continue after retirement. We miss the camaraderie, the respect, the friendships of work. We have too much time on our hands. Health issues surface. We may wonder if we lay aside enough money to fund our remaining years from our childhood home to the retirement home. What is constant is that our trials are never over. And the people of God say, Amen. Right? We keep wishing life away, thinking it's going to get easier in the next season of life, only to find that in that new season, new trials await. They are unavoidable. They are unplanned. They are unpredictable. But the reality is, trials will come. The painful reality of trials is that we are all going to face them, and they're going to be faced for a lifetime. Isn't that encouraging? Aren't you so glad you came to church this morning? But it gets better. So let's move on to point number 2, where we see the perplexing response to trials. And so let's go back now to the beginning of the verse. Verse 2, count it all joy. Now, although we don't get to choose our trials, we do get to choose how we respond to them. Notice a couple more key words we find in this passage. In verse 2, it starts out with the word count. Then in verse number 4, it says, and let. So count and let. As we break this verses apart, we understand that there's a part that you and I play when it comes to trials. In other words, we are active participants in what is produced from these trials. The command in this passage is simple. Count it all joy. Count it all joy when you face these trials. Now, if you're like me, that seems like an oxymoron. If I'm going through a trial, how can I consider it joy? Because the very nature of a trial is that it is hard. It's painful. It's difficult. And I don't know about you, but that just doesn't shout joy when I think about it. Think about some of the trials you faced. Maybe financial. Maybe physical and health related. Maybe relational. Maybe things at your job. I don't know what the trials are that you've experienced in your life, but I can guarantee you this. The first thought on your mind was probably not joy. In fact, I bet if I was to open it up and say, hey, share with me some praises or some things that God is doing that you're excited about, I haven't a feeling because I've seen it many, many times as I've asked a similar question to churches and to people. We all talk about the good things that we see God doing, but very seldom do we equate the trials and the hardships as things that are considered to be joyful. Because as we go through them in the moment, they are not easy. So how do we count them as joy? Well, understand that word count is a financial term, and it means to evaluate. You might have a translation that doesn't translate it as count, but translate it as consider. When we look at our trials, we should not look at them for what they are, but for what they are producing. So we don't look at the trial and see joy in the pain. We look beyond the trial as to what it is producing. Does that make sense? So when he says count it all joy or consider it joy, he's not saying that you need to rejoice in the midst of the pain. You understand it's going to be hard. But what you are is you have faith enough and trust enough to see beyond the pain and beyond the trial to know that there's a God who is working and He is doing something good in the midst of it. That's how we count it as joy. All right? So it's like you tally up the events that happen in your life, right? You think, okay, this was good, this was bad. So we think about all the good things, all the pleasant things, all the enjoyable things, and we mark them in that column. And often what happens is when we come to hardships and difficulties and trials, we put those in the negative column. You say, no, don't count it that way. Count it in this column because God is going to do something good in the midst of your pain. He's going to turn your trial into a testimony if you'll just lean in and embrace what it is He's doing. And so that's the beauty of trials. That's why James could say to these people who are going through so much, count it all joy. Now understand, he's writing this to a group of people who have been basically run out of their homeland, who are facing persecution because of what they believe, who are facing hardships financially, who are facing many physical issues as well. And we're going to see that as we walk through the book. And he tells them to open up the book. Knowing what they're going through, he says, count it all joy, my brothers and sisters, as you go through these things. So we need to learn to consider these things as joyful circumstances because we see what God is doing. And understand, there's a big difference between joy and happiness. Okay, there's a big difference between joy and happiness. Sometimes we use those words interchangeably, but there's a big difference. I like how one preacher said it. He said it this way: happiness is based on what is happening to you, while joy is a posture of your heart. So what's the difference? Happiness is based on happenings. what's going on around you, what's going on in your life. That produces happiness. When things are good, life is good, you're happy. Joy isn't that way. Joy means it's a posture of your heart. It comes from a steadfast relationship with the Lord. You are anchored in Him, knowing that no matter what it is you're going through, He is working. That's the difference between joy and happiness. So again, I can't choose my circumstances, but I can choose whether or not I will respond with joy. And that's why in Hebrews chapter 12, we find this profound statement about Jesus and the suffering He endured on the cross. Notice what it says. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. Looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith. Notice, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of the throne of God. Do you notice what it's saying here? He despised the pain. He hated what He had to endure. It wasn't pleasant going through the experience of the cross, getting your hands nailed to the cross, getting your feet nailed to the cross, wearing a crown of thorns, having to suffocate to death. It wasn't pleasant going through it. But He endured because of the joy that was set before Him. He knew that the end result was going to be salvation for all mankind. That it was going to provide forgiveness for you and for me. And so He could see beyond the pain to what it was producing. And He could go through it with joy. And that's the way that you and I need to face the trials in our life. I know it's not easy to go through them, but we need to see beyond them and look with joy, understanding that we serve a God who takes what seems to be ashes and turns them into beauty. Amen? Amen. This isn't in my notes, but I sit here and I see Deb smiling. I remember a time not too long ago where we were praying around her bed, wondering if she was going to make it through surgery from cancer. I sit here and see Amy remembering being by a hospital bed, wondering what is going to happen. Those things in the moment are not fun. They are not enjoyable. But we can look now and see how God in both those situations has worked amazing things in both of these women's lives. And that testimony would be true for many of you. Because that's what God does. He takes those hard things in our life and He turns them into lessons that we can only learn as we endure the difficult moments of life. We don't have to be happy about going through painful situations, but we should have joy because of what they produce. If God is going to make us like Christ, we must learn to joyfully endure the trials. The perplexing response to trials. And it sounds like an oxymoron, but it's to count it or consider it joy when you face those difficult moments. So again, we've seen the painful reality of trials. They're going to come. The perplexing response to trials is to count it as joy. And now let's look at the promised results of these trials. And that's where we get to the end of this passage. For you know in verse 3 that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. There is a promise tucked away here in the midst of this verse about trials. And that is that God promises that there will be a purpose in your pain. He promises that there will be a purpose in your pain. And again, He'll take that trial and He'll turn it into a triumph. He'll turn your test into a testimony that you can use to glorify Him. And so again, I love what it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 4. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. So understand that what seems hard in the moment, what seems hard at the time, is really a light, momentary affliction because of what God is doing, big picture. Right? In the micro, it's hard. In the macro, You'll get through it because God is at work. All right, and so notice here, he says this idea of steadfastness. He talks about that the trials as we endure produce steadfastness. Other translations might say endurance, right? Steadfast is a word we don't maybe use a whole lot, so maybe think endurance, think patience. The Greek word here is a word known as hupomone. The word hupo means under. The word meno means to stay or abide. And so what he's saying here is we need to remain under the hardship. It's a picture of someone under a heavy load, but choosing to remain under the load instead of trying to escape. Maybe you've been to the gym before. One of my least favorite exercises in the gym is a squat. Hate them. But did you know they're actually probably the best exercise for you? If you're not an avid weightlifter, let me explain the back squat. You put up a bar, you put weight on it, you put it on your back, and then you squat down and you stand back up. And if it's easy, you put more weight on, and then more weight. Right? You go to the gym and you try to squat, it's going to be hard. But the more you do it, the more consistently you do it, the more weight you'll be able to put on, because what are you doing? You're strengthening your muscles, you're building endurance, and that is how you increase the weight on the bar. As we develop the ability to endure or be patient through trials, God does a work in us. And we need to develop patience because it's crucial to receiving God's other blessings in our life. That's why he says so often, wait on the Lord. Right? Be patient. Wait. Watch and see how God works. And so he needs to develop that patience in us so that we're ready to receive all that he has in store. So he's building endurance. And as you go through trials, understand there is something that God is doing. And again, Warren Wiersbe says this: the only way the Lord can develop patience and character in our lives is through trials. Endurance cannot be attained by reading a book, by listening to a sermon, or even praying a prayer. We must go through the difficulties of life, trust God, and obey him. There is no shortcut to developing endurance in your life. There is no shortcut to building patience in your life. You can pray, God, give me patience, but you know what he'll do? He'll give you situations in which you have to learn to practice patience. I've told you this many times before. I thought I was an extremely patient person. Then I had kids and realized I have a long way to go when it comes to being patient. Right? He gives us things in our life to help us learn where we fall short and learn what we need to do to improve. And that's why, again, he says it's a momentary affliction. Because in the moment, yes, it's hard, but God is doing something big picture. Similar to what it says in Romans 5. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance. So let me pause. What produces endurance? Suffering. Okay, so we're again, and Paul's saying it too. And endurance produces character, and character produces hope. So understand, God is at work in your trial. Through the trial, he's producing patience, endurance. As you learn to endure, he's giving you more. And through it, he's building your character, eventually leading to building that hope in your life. Good things come as we learn to endure pain. Let me say it again. Good things come as we learn to endure pain. The joy of children comes with the pain of childbirth. The joy of losing weight comes with the pain of exercise and diet. The joy of buying a new car or new home comes with the pain of many long hours at work. And the list could go on and on and on. Anything good usually has come with pain. It's just a fact of life. Nietzsche the atheist knew it. What doesn't kill me is going to make me stronger. The Bible says it, and I think if we're honest with ourselves, we've all experienced it firsthand in our own lives as we've seen God work in our trials and and turn them into something good. You see, God will complete his work in us, but we need to learn to be patient and rejoice through our trials. God will work. And I love when it says, it ends verse 4, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect. Now that is not sinless perfection. That's not what he's talking about here. He's going to use this word perfect 7 times in the book of James. Number 7, number of perfection. I don't know if James knew that he used it 7 times, but the Holy Spirit did. All right? That idea is perfect or whole or complete. That you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. As we lean in and learn to count our trials as joy, we will see God at work, and we will see that we lack nothing in our lives. None of us enjoy going through hardships, but there is a blessing that can only come through suffering. I'm going to end with a quote by John Newton. We're going to sing one of his famous songs, Amazing Grace, to end our service. But he said this: trials are medicines which our gracious and wise physician prescribes because we need them. And he proportions the frequency and the weight of them to what the case requires. None of us get to write out the prescription for ourselves, but we do get to choose whether or not we will receive it with joy. Let me say it again. We do not get to choose the prescription ourselves. I don't get to go to the doctor and write the script for what I want to endure in life. But I can choose whether or not I'm going to receive it and take it and embrace it and proceed with joy. So again, church, don't get caught looking at the trial. Look beyond it and see what God is doing. And I'm going to close with an illustration. Maybe you've been out west before. It's a dream of mine to go and to visit some of. I've been to Salt Lake City. I haven't been a whole lot of other places out that far. But as you observe out in the west, and you see there's a big difference between how bison and how cattle handle storms. You see, when a storm starts to roll in over the prairie, cattle see it coming, and you know what they do? They try to run away. But what happens is they try to run away, they get caught in the storm, and as they're moving, the storm is moving with them, and they end up having to go through it longer, because as they're trying to run, the storm is just moving along with them. Bison, on the other hand, when they see the storm coming, they don't turn and try to run away. They turn towards the storm and embrace it and hunker down, and soon the storm will pass. So let me ask you, when it comes to the trials and the testing and the difficulties in your life, are you more like the cattle or more like the bison? Are you one who's trying to do all that you can to get out of the trial, get out of the storm, get out of the difficulty as fast as you can, taking control of yourselves and seeing what you can do to manipulate the situation? Or are you like the bison who says, you know what, God? I'm going to trust you. I'm going to believe in you. I'm going to face this head on, because I know if I count it all joy, there is something that you are doing in the midst of the pain, and I'm going to hold on for the lesson you're trying to teach me. So when the trials of life come, are we like the cattle or like the bison? Because I do know this, and I'm not super old, but I've experienced it myself. I see it all the time in the Word of God. If you will learn to simply embrace the trial, look beyond the moment to the God who is working in the moment, I promise you, He is doing something good in your life. He is making your faith stronger with each trial that comes your way. So don't try to navigate around it. Don't try to manipulate the situation and take control of yourself. Instead, lean into God and say, God, I don't know what you're doing, but I trust you. I'm counting it as joy because I know you're going to do good things in my life. And through it, I'm going to learn endurance and patience and steadfastness. And through it, I'm going to become more like Jesus. And so as we go through trials, learn the principle of what it means to count it as joy. And watch God turn your trial into a great testimony of his goodness and faithfulness to you. So, Father, thank you for the truth of your word. Lord, thank you for the way that you work in the difficult seasons of our lives. Lord, I know there's many things in my own life that if I was writing the story and I held a pen, I would not write those things as part of my story. But Lord, as I look back, I can see the way you built my character, the way you built endurance into my life. And Lord, I just want to publicly thank you for how you worked in those situations. Lord, I pray for my brothers and my sisters here under the sound of my voice, those in this room, those watching online. Lord, I don't know the trials that they are facing right now. I don't know what it is that is afflicting them in this moment. But Father, I pray that if they're in a season right now of great trial, that you will remind them that you are good and that you are at work and that you are building endurance in their lives, that they will just stay committed to following you. Lord, maybe we have people in our midst today who are not in a season of great trial or testing. Lord, I pray that you'll help us to rejoice in that, to look for ways we can come along others who are in that season right now, but to know that even though we may not be in it right now, there is something on the horizon, and help us to be just ready to count the next trial as joy when it comes into our lives. So God, we love you. We thank you for the truth we find in this passage, and pray that you'll help each of us to learn the importance of considering our trials joy when we face those difficult things in life.